Hello everyone. Chapter number 4 is Executive. Legislature, Executive, and Judiciary are the three organs of the government. Together, they perform the functions of government, maintain law and order, and look after the welfare of the people. The Constitution ensures that they work in coordination with each other and maintain a balance amongst themselves. In a parliamentary system, executive and the legislature are independent. The legislature controls the executive and in turn is controlled by the executive. In this chapter, we shall discuss the composition, structure, and function of the executive organ of the government. This chapter will also tell you about the changes that have occurred in recent times due to political practice. What is an executive? Who is in charge of the administration of your school? Who takes important decisions in a school or university? In any organization, some officer holder has to take decisions and implement those decisions. We call this activity administration or management. But administration requires a body at the top that will take policy decisions or the big decisions and supervise and coordinate the routine administrative functioning. You may have heard about the executives of big companies, banks, or industrial units. Every formal group has a body of whose function as the chief administrators or the executives of that organization. Some office holders decide the policies and rules and regulations, and then some office holders implement those decisions in actual day to day functioning of the organization. The word executive means a body of persons that look after the implementation of rules and regulations in actual practice. In case of government also, one body may take policy decisions and decide about rules and regulations, while the other one would be in charge of implementing those rules. The organ of government that primarily looks after the function of implementation and administration is called as the executive. What are the principal functions of the executive? Executive is a branch of government responsible for the implementation of laws and policies adopted by the legislature. The executive is often involved in framing of the policy. The official designations of the executive vary from country to country. Some countries have presidents while others have chancellors. The executive branch is not also about presidents, prime ministers, and ministers. It also extends to the administrative machinery, that is, civil servants. While the heads of the government and their ministers, saddled with overall responsibility of government policy, are together known as the political executive. Those responsible for day to day administration are called as the permanent executive. What are the different types of executive? Every country may not have the same type of executive. You may have heard about the President of the USA and Queen of England, but the powers and functions of the President of USA are very different from the powers of President of India. Similarly, the powers of Queen of England are different from the powers of King of Bhutan. Both India and France have prime ministers, but their roles are very different. The USA has a presidential system and executive powers are in the hands of the president. Canada has a parliamentary democracy with a constitutional monarchy where Queen Elizabeth II is the formal chief of the state and the prime minister is the head of the government. In France, both the president and prime minister are a part of the semi presidential system. The president appoints the prime minister as well as the ministers but cannot dismiss them as they are responsible to the parliament. Japan has a parliamentary system with the emperor as the head of the state and the prime minister as the head of the government. Italy has a parliamentary system with the president as the formal head of state and the prime minister as the head of the government. Russia has a semi-presidential system whose president is the head of the state and prime minister, who is appointed by the president, is the head of the government. Germany has a parliamentary system in which president is the ceremonial head of the state and the chancellor is the head of the government. In a presidential system, the president is the head of the state as well as the head of the government. In this system, the office of the president is very powerful, both in theory and practice. Countries with such a system include the United States, Brazil, and most nations in Latin America. In a parliamentary system, the prime minister is the head of the government. Most parliamentary systems have a president or a monarch who is the nominal head of the state. In such a system, the role of the president of monarch is primarily ceremonial and with prime minister along with the cabinet wields effective power. Countries with such system include Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom as well as Portugal. A semi-presidential system has both a president and a prime minister, but unlike the parliamentary system, the president may possess significant day-to-day powers. In this system, it is possible that sometimes the president and the prime minister may belong to some party, and at times they may belong to different parties, and thus would be opposed to each other. Countries with such a system include France, Russia, Sri Lanka. parliamentary executive in India. When the Constitution of India was written, India already had some experience of running the parliamentary system under the Acts of 1919 and 1935. This experience had shown that in parliamentary system, the executive can be effectively controlled by the representatives of the people. The makers of Indian Constitution wanted to ensure that the government would be sensitive to public expectations and would be responsible and accountable. The other alternative to the parliamentary executive was the presidential form of government. But the presidential executive puts much emphasis on the president as the chief executive and as a source of all the executive power. There is always the danger of personality cult in presidential executive. The makers of the Indian Constitution wanted a government that would have strong executive branch, but at the same time, enough safeguards would be there to check against the personality cult. In the parliament, from there are many mechanisms that ensure that the executive will be answerable to and controlled by the legislature or people's representatives. So the constitution adopted the parliamentary system of executive for the governments both at the state and national levels. According to this system, there is a president who is the formal head of the state of India and a prime minister and a council of ministers which run government at the national level. At the state level, the executive comprises the governor and the chief minister and the council of ministers. The Constitution of India vests the executive power of the Union formally in the President. In reality, President exercises these powers through the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. The President is elected for a period of 5 years, but there is no direct election by the people for the office of President. The President is elected indirectly. This means that the President is elected not by the ordinary citizens but by the elected MLAs and MPs. The election takes place in the accordance with principle of proportional representation with single transferable vote. The president can be removed from the office by parliament by following the procedure for impeachment. This procedure requires a special majority as explained in the last chapter. The only ground for impeachment is violation of the constitution. Power and position of the president. We have already seen that the president is the formal head of the government. In this formal sense, the president has a wide-ranging executive, legislative, judicial and emergency powers. In a parliamentary system, these powers are in reality used by the president only on the advice of the Council of Ministers. The Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers have support of the majority in the Lok Sabha and they are the real executive. In most of the cases, the President has to follow the advice of the Council of Ministers. Directionary powers of the President. On the above basis and the discussion, we can infer that the President has no directionary power under any circumstances. This may be an incorrect assessment. Constitutionally, the President has a right to be informed of all important matters, deliberations of the Council of Ministers. The Prime Minister is obliged to furnish all the information that the President may call for. The President often writes to the Prime Minister and expresses his views on matters confronting the country. Besides this, there are at least 3 situations where the President can exercise the powers using his or her own discretion. In the first place, we have already noted that the President can send back the advice given by the Council of Ministers and ask the Council to reconsider the decision. In doing this, the President acts on his or her own discretion. When the President thinks that the advice has certain flaws or legal lacunae, or that it is not in the best interest of the country, President can ask the Council to reconsider this decision. Although the Council can still send back the same advice and the President would then be bound by that advice, such a request by the President to reconsider the decision would naturally carry a lot of weight. So this is the one in which the President can act in his own discretion. Secondly, the President also has a veto power by which he can withhold or refuse to give assent to bills other than money bill passed by the Parliament. Every bill passed by the Parliament goes to the President for his assent before it becomes a law. The President can send the bill back to the Parliament asking it to reconsider the bill. This veto power is limited because if the Parliament passes the same bill again and again, it sends it back to the President. Then the President has to give assent to that bill. However, there is no mention in the constitution about the time limit within which the president must send the bill back for reconsideration. This means that the president can just keep bill pending with him without any time limit. This gives the president an informal power to use the veto in a very effective manner. This is sometimes referred to as pocket veto. Then the third kind of discretion arises more out of political circumstances. Formally, the president appoints the prime minister. Normally, in the parliamentary system, a leader who has the support of the majority in Lok Sabha would be appointed as the prime minister, and the question of discretion would not arise. But imagine a situation when, after an election, no leader has clear majority in Lok Sabha. Imagine further that after attempts to forge alliances, two or three leaders are claiming that they have the support of the majority in the House. Now, the president has to decide whom to appoint as the prime minister. In such a situation, the president has to use his own discretion in judging who really can run the government and actually form everything. Since 1989, major political changes have considerably increased the importance of the presidential office. In the four parliamentary elections held from 1989 to 1998, no single party or coalition attained a majority in Lok Sabha. These situations demanded presidential intervention either in the order to constitute governments or to grant a request for dissolution of Lok Sabha by a prime minister who could not prove majority in the House. It may thus be said that presidential discretion is related to political conditions. There is a greater scope for presidential assertiveness when the governments are not stable and coalitions occupy power. For the most part, the president is a formal power holder and a ceremonial head of the nation. In a parliamentary system, the Council of Ministers is dependent on the support of the majority in the legislature. This also means that the Council of Ministers may be removed at any time and a new Council of Ministers will have to be put in the place. Such a situation requires a head of the state who has fixed term, who may have empowered to appoint the Prime Minister and who may symbolically represent the entire country. This is exactly the role of the President in ordinary circumstances. Besides, no party has a clear majority. The President has the additional responsibility of making a choice and appointing the Prime Minister to run the government of the country. The Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. We have already seen earlier in this chapter that the President exercises his powers only on the advice of Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers is headed by the Prime Minister. Therefore, as the head of the Council of Ministers, the Prime Minister becomes the most important functionary of the government in our country. In the parliamentary form of executive, it is essential that the Prime Minister has the support of the majority in Lok Sabha. This support by majority also makes the Prime Minister very powerful. The moment this support of this majority is lost, the Prime Minister loses the office. For many years after independence, the Congress party had the majority in the Lok Sabha and its leader would become the Prime Minister. Since 1989, there have been many occasions when no party had a majority in the Lok Sabha. Various political parties have come together and formed a coalition that has a majority in the House. In such situations, the leader who is acceptable to most partners of the coalition becomes the Prime Minister. Formally, a leader who has the support of the majority is appointed by the president as the prime minister. The prime minister then decides who will be the ministers in the council of ministers. The prime minister allocates ranks and portfolios to the ministers. Depending upon the seniority and the political importance, the ministers are given ranks of the cabinet minister, minister of state, or deputy minister. In the same manner, chief ministers of the state choose chief ministers from their own party or coalition. The prime minister and all the ministers have to be members of the parliament. If some becomes a minister or a prime minister without being an MP, such a person has to get elected to the parliament within 6 months. In the chapter on legislature, you will study in detail the various mechanisms through which the parliament controls the executive. But remember that the most important feature of the parliamentary executive is that the executive is routinely under the control and supervision of the legislature. The Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. The provision means that a ministry which loses confidence of Lok Sabha is obliged to resign. The principle indicates that the ministry is an executive committee of the parliament and it is collectively governs on behalf of the parliament. Collective responsibility is based on the principle of the solidarity of the cabinet. It simplifies that a vote of no confidence, even against a single minister, leads to the resignation of the entire Council of Ministers. It also indicates that if a minister does not agree with the policy or decision of the cabinet, he or she must either accept the decision or resign. It is binding on all the ministers to pursue or agree to a policy for which there is a collective responsibility. In India, the Prime Minister enjoys a preeminent place in the government. The Council of Ministers cannot exist without the Prime Minister. The council comes into existence only after the Prime Minister has taken the oath in the office. The death or resignation of the Prime Minister automatically brings about the dissolution of the Council of Ministers, but the dismissal or resignation of a minister only creates a ministerial vacancy. The Prime Minister acts as a link between the Council of Ministers on one hand and the President as well as the Parliament on the other hand. It is the role of the Prime Minister which led Nehru to describe him as the linchpin of the government. It also the constitutional obligation of the Prime Minister to communicate to the President of all decisions of the Council of Ministers relating to the administration of the affairs of the Union and proposals for legislation. The Prime Minister is involved in all the crucial decisions of the government and decides on the politics of the government. Thus, the power wielded by the Prime Minister flows from various sources: control over the Council of Ministers, leaderships of the Lok Sabha, command over the bureaucratic machine, access to media, projection of personalities during elections, projection as national leaders during international summitry, as well as foreign visits. However, the power which the Prime Minister yields and actually puts into use depends upon the prevailing political conditions. The position of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers has been unassailable whenever a single political party has secured majority in the Lok Sabha. However, this has not been the case when governments have been led by coalitions by political parties. Since 1989, we have witnessed many coalition governments in India. Many of these governments could not remain in power for a full term in Lok Sabha. They were either removed or they resigned due to loss of support of majority. These developments have affected the working of the parliamentary executive. In the first place, the developments have resulted in growing directionary role of the president in selection of prime ministers. Secondly, the coalition nature of Indian politics in this period has necessitated much more consultation between political partners, leading to erosion of prime ministerial authority. Thirdly, it has also brought restrictions on various prerogatives at the prime minister, like choosing the ministers and deciding their ranks and portfolios. Fourthly, even the policies and programs of the government cannot be decided by the prime minister alone. Political parties of the different ideologies come together both as pre-poll and post-poll allies to form a government. Policies are framed after a lot of negotiations and compromises among the allies. In this entire process, the Prime Minister has to act more as a negotiator than as a leader of the government. At the state level, a similar parliamentary executive exists, though with certain variations. The most important variation is that there is a governor of the state appointed by the president on the advice of the central government. Though the chief minister, like the prime minister, is the leader of the majority party in assembly, the governor has more directionary power. However, the main principles of parliamentary system operate at the state level too. Permanent executive who implements the decisions of the ministers. The executive organ of the government includes the prime minister, the ministers, and a large organization called the administrative machinery. To underline the difference between this machinery and a military service, it is described as a civil service. Trained and skilled officers who work as the permanent employees of the government are assigned the task to assisting the ministers in formulating policies and implementing these policies. In a democracy, the elected representatives are the ministers, and they are in charge of the government, and the administration is under their control and supervision. In this parliamentary system, the legislature also exercises control over the administration. The administrative officers cannot act in violation of the policies adopted by the legislature. It is responsible for the ministers to retain political control over the administration. India has established a professional administrative machinery. At the same time, this machinery is made politically accountable. It is also expected to be politically neutral. This means that it will not take any political position on policy matters. In a democracy, it is always possible that a party is defeated in elections and the new government wants to opt for a new policies in the place of policies of the previous government. In such a situation, it is the responsibility of the administrative machinery to faithfully and efficiently participate in drafting the policy and its implementation. The Indian bureaucracy today is an enormously complex system. It consists of all India services, state services, employees of the local governments, and technical and managerial staff running public sector undertakings. Makers of our constitution, we are aware of the importance of the non-partisan and professional bureaucracy. They also wanted the members of the civil services or bureaucracy to be impartially selected on the basis of merit. So the Union Public Service Commission has been entrusted with the task of conducting the process of recruitment of the civil servants for the government of India. Similar public service commissions are provided for the states also. Members of the public service commissions are appointed for a fixed term. The removal or suspension is subject to a thorough inquiry made by a judge for the Supreme Court. While efficiency and merit are the norms for recruitment, the Constitution also ensures that all sections of the society, including the weaker sections, have an opportunity to be the part of the public bureaucracy. For this purpose, the Constitution has provided the reservation of jobs for Dalits and Adivasis. Subsequently, reservations have also been provided for women and backward classes. These provisions ensure that the bureaucracy would be more representative and social inequalities will not come in the way of the recruitment of the civil service. The person selected by the UPSC for Indian Administrative Service and Indian Policy Service constitute the backbone of the higher level bureaucracy in the states. You may now know that the collector of a district is the most important officer of the government at the district level. Do you know that the collector is normally an IAS officer and that the government is governed and that the officer is governed by the service conditions laid down by the central government. An IAS or IPS officer is assigned to a particular state where he or she works under the supervision of state government. However, the IAS or IPS officers are appointed by the central government. They can go back to service of the central government, and most importantly, only the central government can take disciplinary action against them. This means that the key administrative officers of the state are under the supervision and control of the central government. Apart from the IAS and IPS officers appointed by the UPSC, the administration of the state is looked after by officers appointed through the state public service commissions. As we shall study later in the chapter on federalism, this feature of bureaucracy strengthens the control of the central government over the administration of the states. The bureaucracy is an instrument through which the welfare policies of the government must reach the people. But most often it is so powerful that the people are afraid of approaching a government officer. It is a common experience of the people that bureaucracy is insensitive to the demands and expectations of the ordinary citizen. Only if the democratically elected government controls the bureaucracy, some of these problems can be effectively handled. On the other hand, too much political interference turns the bureaucracy into an instrument in the hands of the politician. Though the constitution has created independent machinery for recruitment, many people think that there is no provision for protecting the civil servants from the political interference in the performance of their duties. It is also felt that enough provisions are not there to ensure the accountability of the bureaucracy to the citizen. There is an expectation that measures like the right to information may make the bureaucracy a little more responsive and accountable. So, to conclude this chapter, we shall see that the modern executive is a very powerful institution of the government. The executive enjoys greater powers compared to the other halves of the government and other organs of the government. This generates a greater need to have a democratic control over the executive. The makers of our constitution thought with foresight that the executive must be put firmly under the regular supervision and control. Thus, a parliamentary executive was chosen. Periodic elections, constitutional limits over the exercise of powers, and democratic politics have ensured that executive organ cannot become unresponsive. Thank you.